Accurate, diverse stories in the media are critically important. SRC Partners is a full-service cultural production firm. From development to market, we provide expertise on diversity and inclusivity. You will reach a much wider audience when they feel heard.
Welcome to the Non-Obvious Beyond Diversity Summit. My name is Sanchita Balachandran, and I'm your moderator for this session, Remembering the Past, How Museums Drive the Conversation about Diversity. So I'm an art conservator and a museum professional who's been working in the field for 2 decades, and I also teach courses on museum practice and museum ethics. And I am founder director of Untold Stories, a nonprofit organization that is fulfilling the desire to speak more diverse stories about the preservation of our cultural heritage as human beings. So it is really my pleasure and a great joy to invite our panelists for the session. So first will be Dr. Marissa Brown. Then we will hear from Dr. Ayana Omilade Flewellen, and then we'll hear from Lilian Posadas. And I'm going to invite them all to introduce themselves. But before we begin that work, I'd really like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from a place now called Baltimore, but that is the ancestral homeland of the Susquehannock people, and is also a place of gathering and stewardship for many Native peoples, including the Accohannock, the Nanticoke, the Piscataway, the Lumbee, and the Cherokees. And I am deeply grateful to be able to call this place home. So with that, I'd really like to invite our other panelists to introduce themselves. So.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa Brown, and I would also like to acknowledge I'm speaking today from the city we call Providence, which is the ancestral homelands of the Narragansetts and the Wampanoags. Also, I'm at Brown University, and we usually also start our events when we are at Brown with an acknowledgement that our campus has buildings that were built with enslaved labor by enslaved people. I'm really pleased to be here. So I'm an architectural historian, and my focus is really critical heritage studies. I'm interested in the field of preservation and how the history of preservation and the ways especially that preservation practice really needs to change to be more inclusive because it has not in the past. So sort of both a lover and a critic of preservation practice, and I'm really excited to be part of this conversation today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ayana Omilade Flewellen, pronoun she, her, hers. I live in Long Beach, California, which is occupied Tongva territory. I am an assistant professor at the University of California, Riverside, and I'm the president-elect and co-founder of the Society of Black Archaeologists, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation of African diasporic material culture worldwide, as well as invested in creating pathways for archaeologists of African descent to succeed in this field. I'm also a board member of an organization called Diving with a Purpose, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to oceanic conservation and preservation of African diasporic submerged heritage resources. I'm really excited to engage in this conversation as both SBA and DWP are doing phenomenal work to transform the field of archaeology and heritage studies more broadly by including not only folks of African descent in this field, but also providing communities with the tools necessary to be cultural stewards of their own heritage.
And I am Lilian Posadas, coming here to you virtually from Tobangar, also known as Los Angeles, a remarkable and beautiful place. To my owe a great debt of gratitude to the Tongva people for all the care they've given to this place and continue to give to this place. We're scheduled, I think, to have about 2 years of rain coming soon, and I know water is a big concern for all of us here. So something that I've always been told by Tongva colleagues is the importance of caring for our water and being very mindful about how we use water here in Los Angeles. So I am, I work in museum settings. Right now I'm currently at the Autry Museum of the American West, and I am their repatriation and community research manager there. I've been working in repatriation for a little over 10 years now. And I work primarily in facilitating the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which is a law that was passed in 1990 to ensure the return of sacred and ceremonial objects to Native communities, and as well as ancestral human remains that are currently in museums back to Native communities. And I am primarily interested in the ways in which investigating the history of museums, how they came to be, the power that they've wielded over our understanding of Native communities and marginalized communities in general, how we can investigate that history and interrogate how we received the collections that are currently in museums, and identifying whether these collections were acquired ethically with full informed consent, and whether they need to go back home. And also, I'm very interested in how we can utilize this practice of repatriation to transform museum practices top to bottom. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, I mean, I'm already very excited because this is kind of the dream conversation. So I have, a few questions to sort of get us started, but I'm sure the conversation will go in different directions. But my first question to you is, I think there's some stereotypes about what each of us do, whether we're historians, museum professionals, archaeologists. There's sort of these fantasy stereotypes about what it is we do. And I think especially being your kind of non-typical specialist in these fields, we have to take on all of these other kinds of responsibilities. So could you talk a little bit about how your day-to-day work reflects the kind of, I think the deeper concerns we all hold about really making sure that our workspaces, our disciplines are really diverse. So could you talk a little bit about what you actually do on a day-to-day basis? Jump in.
Are we going to do what our students do to us?
I know.
Begin by staring blankly.
I mean, you're also amazing, incredible. I feel so honored to be a part of this panel, and I'm just eager to hear from
Me too.
everybody.
Tell me what you do. How do you do your magic?
I guess I can start. I think part of the hesitation for me, as an archaeologist, we have like our field seasons, and that is when we're out in the field. And I feel like the day-to-day, I'm like, my day-to-day? What do you mean, like in the field, out the field? Like I sort of like gotten my head around that. But I will say that this is my second quarter teaching at the University of California, Riverside. And the students there are absolutely phenomenal. And it's one of the most diverse campuses within the UC system. And I teach a course on African diaspora archaeology. And sometimes this is the first time that students have even been introduced to the thought that archaeology is happening at sites pertaining to African and African diasporic heritage. And it gets them really excited about it. And I could see the students of color, especially Black students, light up around being able to talk about this history. So I think my day-to-day right now, in this sort of COVID era, is really centered around introducing students to a new avenue in which they can engage African diasporic history through material culture, which, for me, it was the first time that I had gotten that as well as an undergraduate taking an archaeology class on African American life and history, especially within a discipline that is, staunchly embedded in colonialism and staunchly embedded in uplifting national narratives that oftentimes exclude historically marginalized communities like Native American communities, African diasporic communities here in California, East Asian, South Asian communities as well in that history. So being in front of these students as a Black queer woman, sharing this method, sharing this discipline with them, it's, for a lot of them, it's the first time that they've seen a Black woman, who does this work, or could really imagine that this could be an avenue for them to also engage and critically ask themselves questions about their own heritage. So my day-to-day looks like that right now. And I look forward to getting back to the day-to-day when I can be out in the field doing archaeology with, fantastic community members out in the water diving with fantastic Black, citizen scientists, but I don't have that right now. Yeah.
Well, I'll jump in because mine's similar. In when you asked the question, I sort of thought about it. I mean, my first thought was bifurcation because I also sort of am, in the classroom part of my time, and then doing my own research and writing and speaking and outside of academia. And so, in some ways, it a little bit to me always feels like the things one takes for granted in one community are completely foreign to another community. And so getting used to that, which feels a lot like time travel in a way, because I think that certainly with the students, I feel like I and they are very much on the same page in terms of the issues we're talking about today. They come wanting to go out and change their fields, museum practice, preservation, heritage studies, seeing the sort of the problems of white dominance and supremacy in the history of these institutions, being really committed to making change. And then I sometimes feel when I step out of that, that all of the things that are taken for granted in those conversations are literally not even on the page for a lot of people in practice. And I think for me, sometimes when you run into that in certain conversations, it's always a little bit of a shock, and it's a little depressing in some ways, because I think that one hopes that one hopes that we could all be having the same conversation at the same time, but it doesn't quite feel like that yet in this field. And I think that's both a negative, but then again, you look back to the classroom and you see the next generation and you sort of think to yourself, well, if this old guard is not willing to have the conversation today, they're going to have to be in 15 years because this new generation is going to be in charge. And these are the issues they care about. So I think there's sort of, for me, a sense of sort of bifurcation between the things we take for granted within the classroom, and then the things that are, sort of taken for granted outside of the classroom sometimes.
I really love how you brought up this new generation of folks, of students. I have, in the last few years, have had a really wonderful opportunity to work with students in a museum setting. I've worked with prior to my current position at the Autry, I was at the Fowler Museum at UCLA, and I worked with students. Being in a university museum, I was working with students all the time. And now I'm working with students from a variety of different campuses that are also from a variety of different disciplines they've come to this realization and early in their career or in their studies that they're interested in investigating museums as a potential avenue. And so I've worked with conservation students, museum studies students, art history students, anthropology students, archaeology students, and I see this sort of incredible interest in doing work that relates directly to their communities and their histories that they clearly see a need for, because they haven't been getting that information at school, and so they want to do this research, and then are finding that it's been difficult. That they go to a Society of American Archaeologists meeting and it's not at all what they might have expected, and then are going out there and trying to find people who they can talk to. And it's not a huge group of people, at least currently. It's not the most diverse field currently, but it is. There is a network of support out there, and so I've had students who have connected with someone at the Smithsonian institutions, who then come back home for the summer to LA, and then that colleague will place them in touch with me, and we can continue to support them. And I'm really excited for the work that's coming and the conversations that are being held among younger people and students who are also facing they're in a really difficult position with the pandemic, and these 30% of museum jobs that we're hearing may never be coming back. Yeah. But at the same time, one of the things I keep telling students is you don't have to do things the way we've all been doing it. Like if anything, don't do it the way we've been doing it. Like, do things differently. And that we, these systems were not given to us by some magical, all-powerful being. Like, people have created these systems, and we can completely dismantle them, and we can create something new. So as there is resistance in some museums or academic institutions to change, which is real, or in some professional organizations, I'm more and more of the mind of, do we really need them though? We have so many incredible people, so many talented people, and hardworking, disciplined people in our communities, this new generation of students, people who have been, doing the grind for a long time and holding strong. Can we just work together and start building these new systems and supporting each other? And then eventually that will be the mainstream thing, and everybody else is just going to look embarrassingly out of touch, and will eventually have to catch up. So I'm hopeful, but I completely also diverted from the question. So, but I'd like to in this theme of like what we might be doing in the future. My position as a repatriation manager is a very new position. NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which is a federal law, was passed in 1990. Just to ensure that we're all on the same page, it was passed in 1990. Museums and cultural institutions that receive federal funding, or any institution that receives federal funding, has to comply with NAGPRA. And so it's only really been around for a short period of time relative to other museum positions. And even now, it's mostly been a grant-funded position. So it's been mostly temporary for a lot of folks, for a lot of institutions. A 2-year position funded by a federal grant, and then that's it. And what I am advocating for is that institutions that have literal ancestral human remains, the literal family remains of Native people in their possession, and the sacred belongings of Native people in their possession. This is not a solution that you will arrive to in 2 years with a grant-funded position. Like this. Institutions really need to thoroughly commit to mending these relationships, doing the work of complying with NAGPRA, and forging new paths forward. It's really justice work. Like, there were incredible injustices that were committed historically, and a 2-year grant-funded position is never going to cut it. So I'm fortunate enough that I am in a permanent position. But also, as I speak with students that are interested in repatriation, what the future of that may hold, it's up to us to build it. We have to design this new work moving forward, and advocate for a real meaningful commitment from some of these places.
Well, can I follow up on that and ask? I mean, because probably all of us have heard the kind of institution speak of diversity, and it's sort of become like a corporatized statement. We care about diversity and inclusion, and then the people who are asked to actually do all of that work, are those of us who have been asking for change, but have usually not been given the resources or the kind of leadership positions in order to actually make those changes permanent. So can you reflect a little bit about your own frustrations about how diversity is used or misused? And can you say, do you have a vision for what diversity could truly mean? Like what would that look and feel like in your view, if we could have that happen?
That is such a profound question. It's like so much to even chew on, and I think my head is still spinning around some of the words that Lillian shared as well. Just thinking about where we're having these conversations, and I found that some of the most generative conversations around how to transform our disciplines are not happening in academic spaces, are not happening at conference spaces, and for example, the Society of Black Archaeologists is one of them. It was founded by myself and a colleague of mine, Justin Donovan. I was a senior undergraduate at the University of Florida at the time, and he was a first-year graduate student. And both of us having experienced the stark sort of whiteness that is so prevalent at the Society for Historical Archaeology and at the SAA conferences, really wanted to create a space for Black archaeologists, archaeologists of African descent, to be able to network with one another to succeed in this field, and also to create pathways for others who look like us to do the same. And those conversations and the foundation of that, took place, not as a symposium or panels, but amongst colleagues and word of mouth at first. And it built and it grew and it became the support system with so many different hands forming and shaping it and being built atop of so much labor from elders in our discipline who were the first and onlys. And we still have so many, faculty members and graduate students who are the onlys in their departments right now and feeling isolated. So I feel like the frustrations that I think a lot of folks sort of come up against around like trying to convince an institution to feel and seek out diversity and inclusion as like a worthy and valuable space of investment. I've always been of the mindset that we can create those spaces, and we do. And when we create those spaces, the work that comes out of it is so much more nourishing for the people involved, like myself and my colleagues, and then so much more nourishing for the communities that we serve. And I feel like, continuing to do those conversations and utilizing the resources that are at our hands really makes that much more possible. So SVA, founded in 2011, became a nonprofit in 2018 by, the junior of the junior scholars. And now Justin and I are both here in the UC system, part of, the UC's HBCU initiative to actually fund HBCU students to get into heritage and preservation work at the site that we're looking at. But more than that, we started to have these larger conversations where we're pulling in the people who work at larger institutions, if it's like funding agencies or larger archaeology centers, and asking them, hey, we have these ideas, you have money. Like, how can we like work with one another? Hey, we have these ideas, you have resources. And then a lot of it is also coming up and doing and funding our own resources as well. So I think, work has to be done on both sides, but I very much am invested in the necessity for spaces outside of institutions to provide nourishment and sustenance for scholars of color to even be able to succeed and survive in those other spaces.
And SBA is doing incredible stuff. I mean, just incredible work. So truly, an inspiration to watch what you've been doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's so inspiring to be a part of this conversation with all three of you. I think, Lilium, you said something when you spoke about kind of this challenge, the way I understood it was, where do you make the change? Sometimes there's the impulse to be in what is maybe an historic, older, larger institution and try to be making change from within that institution. And sometimes those are the ones that are most resistant to it versus deciding to leave them and go off and, create change with other like-minded people, with new organizations, new projects. And so I think, that's a great question, I think, for everyone who does this work. I think that, there are pulls that are certainly in both ways I've experienced over my career. I think, when I think about where the conversation is right now, back to your question about diversity and sort of how it's talked about, I think one thing that really needs to change is that within sort of the historic institutions that have been historically white dominant, and the culture has been white dominant, and to an extent is white dominant, there can be this sense that issues of diversity are secondary. They're not the primary issues of the institution. And I think there's a sense that they don't, addressing them does not contribute to what is seen to be the central mission. And that's absolutely not true, because I think that the central mission and the ability to accomplish it, whether it's education or museum work or preservation and heritage work, only gets stronger the more diverse the team is and the experiences they bring to it. And so I think that I think it's still frustrating to me that there's not that recognition, because there's not that recognition, sometimes these issues get put in the to do later category, not the first list of 5 items. And I think that, within those big institutions, there just needs to be recognition that it's not really secondary to what one is able to achieve. It's absolutely primary. So that's what I wish for.
Yeah, I think
I just want to say, I just agree with everything, that was just said also. And it's also really important to hear about the work you've done, Ayana, and, the creation of organizations outside of those structures, which are incredibly important. And I love the word nourishing. I think it's a really important word that you used. So I think it's just such a great question about some of these, we're kind of getting to systems right now. We're thinking about systems of power and structures, and almost on a personal level, how we all have limited hours in the day, and where you assign your hours, basically, and how you think about where you can make the most impact given some of the systems that we all live within.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is, it really gives me a lot to think about. In conversations with colleagues and in my own experience to some extent, it can be draining, and I think for many people also re-traumatizing to be in some of these spaces. One of the things that I am trying to be really conscientious of is the impact that doing the work has on a person when they're in a space where they're not getting holistic support, where the idea of a more holistic or nourishing approach to caring for one another in these spaces is just doesn't even cross people's minds, and it's not part of the institutional culture or practice. And when I work with Native communities on repatriation cases, we're coming across some really dark history, boldly in front of us on paper or through objects, and there's no way to compartmentalize that. It is an emotional experience. It's an experience that people carry with them when they come to the museum and when they leave. These projects take years to accomplish. Where is the care? Where's the caring aspect of this work, where we need to ensure that people have a moment when they come across some derogatory language in a primary source, for instance. So I want to encourage institutions and who are interested in genuinely changing to look at this bigger picture of how that we're working with people. We're working with people. We're working with communities. We're working with the things that people made and the meaning that they carry. So how can we reconnect to this humanity and start looking at people as whole human beings, and what kind of environment and what kind of institutional culture can we create that supports that? Because I've been hearing for a number of years this word relationships being brought up, how important it is to build community and institutional relationships, relationships with one another. And I hear much less this exploration of what we mean by relationships. We can have horrible relationships, unhealthy relationships, exploitative, extractive relationships. So what are we really talking about, and how do we learn how to have healthy relationships and supportive and nourishing relationships? If we are really committed to investigating, addressing, doing something about these injustices, like how can we really reflect on who we are, what we need to do right, how we need to learn to do those things, and then investing in gaining those skills and supporting one another through those journeys.
Well, can I follow up on that? Because I think what you've all touched on, which is something that I think in academic institutions and a lot of the, scientific research institutions that we tend to engage with, whether they're museums or academia, often, the idea that you might actually emotionally engage with the material that you're studying, the material that you are a temporary steward of, that you're currently caring for, often by happenstance, there's a sense that you can't be emotionally invested because somehow that limits your intellectual, capacity to kind of do rigorous work. And I think it's really powerful that all of you have said how important it is to actually engage in emotional, caring ways with sometimes very difficult heritage, but also kind of resilient, surviving heritage that still can be connected to different communities and people. I think that's incredibly powerful. Since we're coming to, sort of near the end of our conversation already, which is astonishing to me, I'm wondering, are there kind of 3 words you live by, or can you think of sort of a foundational truth that you hold on to in your work that helps you in these moments when you're really kind of, I think we deal with a lot of really emotional stuff. So, is there something that you hold on to that has given you this ability to remain resilient or to return to work that is really hard but necessary?
Yeah, absolutely. I can start us off. I feel like the first thing that comes to my mind is remembering who I'm in service to. Like, I'm in service to the African diasporic community. I'm not in service to my institution. And that allows me to really think through what it is that I prioritize, what it is that I put the most labor, energy, that sort of love work into. And I think it keeps me grounded in understanding, what the purpose of it is for. Like this work, archaeology, but whether it's terrestrial or underwater, the work that I'm doing along with my colleagues, it's for the African diasporic community. And bringing them into this work, getting their hands dirty, putting them underwater to actually do the work of unearthing that history that is not in service to my institution, that will not acknowledge it as anything outside of service, which is devalued anyways. But it's for them. And I think, keeping that at the forefront of my mind grounds me in this work.
I think something that comes to mind for me is the importance of honesty. Honesty is something I keep trying to return to. Being honest about our history in these institutions, honest about what I know, what I don't know, what I need to learn, and honest in my communications with everyone who I come into in contact with. Because it's we need to tell the truth about how some of these museums came to be and how much work we have left to do and where we are in that process in order to really identify what we need and how we can take steps together to move forward. Another thing is sharing in the experience, like I remembering that we need to do this together. This is not a one-person effort. This is this is going to be, at least in my area of repatriation, this is going to be a multi-generational project. My assistant, Courtney Littleaxe, who we hired a couple of years ago, is not yet 30, and NAGPRA is 30 years old, and so she's picking up, where so many other people are going to be leaving off, and is among this new generation of folks taking on this work. So the importance of supporting one another, working together, and sharing in the experience of this work. And I guess lastly, the other thing that's come to mind and has been a recent lesson I've learned to really try to differentiate the difference between what is impossible and what is just very difficult. And to try and identify when I'm confusing those two because of fear of doing the difficult work and what that might, the toll that might take, but to really understand, like, some things, what is really just not possible and what is just going to be a long, hard journey, but entirely possible.
Yeah, I think honesty is a really important one. I think one thing that really motivates me is kind of understanding power dynamics and always being critical, sort of taking a critical understanding of, museums, public humanities organizations, preservation, heritage, trying to understand, that often these institutions are built by people who have had power, and often they're built to kind of extend that power. And I think that, it's really important to recognize, for me, power. And the other thing I think that motivates me on the positive side, less the critical side, but more the kind of generative side, is just the phrase spatial justice and what that means to me. And that really, for me, kind of gets at why I'm so interested in preservation and public art and architecture and monuments, because all of these things that we preserve, that continue to exist of the historic landscape that we have, reflect power relationships from the past. And in order to change those power relationships in the present, for me, spatial justice as a phrase is something that's sort of encapsulates why it's important and how in that field, how to make that field more of an activist field, how to be an activist in that field.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have just a few minutes left, so I wanted to invite you, first of all, to tell anybody who is watching right now how they can support your work. But here's kind of my secret desire that well, not so secret since we're being recorded. I'd love to hear what you would say to a student watching you right now. Like one piece of advice that maybe, they can put into action right away, in addition to how they can learn more about all of the amazing work that you're doing.
Yeah, if you want to support the Society of Black Archaeologists, definitely go to www.societyofblackarchaeologists.com. Diving with the Purpose is www.divingwithapurpose.org. And if I had to share one piece of advice with students, it's make some noise. The Black Studies movement, which transformed academic spaces, began by students making noise, students coming together and really calling out their administration. And doing that work actually speaks so much louder than what faculty members can do, and allows us to support and elevate you all. But it's just knowing that power exists and that you actually can create change. It's the key.
Reflecting on that question, I think one of the ways to support, which ways to support the work, I guess, is ask questions. Don't assume that because an institution has incredible contemporary Native art on the walls that they don't have ancestors in the basement, and that they are lagging in that work. So ask questions, and if you're connected to a funding organization, ask questions about what projects are being prioritized, And I guess for students, I guess I already feel so proud of this new generation of students, and I would say trust yourself, trust your gut, listen to your feelings that come up when something doesn't quite feel right. Like really dig into that, and to maintain a community with your maintain a community. Don't let go of a community, because you're going to need to lean on each other as you all do this work together.
Yeah, I agree. I think for students, what I would say I mean, in terms of organizations too, I think a really interesting organization for people who care about preservation and heritage issues is the Association of Critical Heritage Studies. I just joined as the treasurer of that organization, and it's really exciting because I think what's really exciting about it is that so many of the membership are really drawn from graduate students, those who are just entering the field. So it sort of has the perspective of, I think, the next generation in terms of how we think about critical heritage and preservation work. And the thing I'd say I say to my students actually that when we are speaking to each other, we're often, like I said in the beginning, sort of all on the same page. But if you do this work, it doesn't take long to get into a room or around a table with people who don't just not agree with you, but where you are the only person who may feel strongly about an action that the organization might take or an action they don't want to take. And I think you can't be prepared in some ways on an emotional level for what it feels like to wonder whether you should speak up or not, especially when you're young and you're just entering a field. And everyone else around the table has 40 or 50 years on you or 35 years on you of experience. But I think you just have to trust your gut and say what you feel needs to be said. And it can be very uncomfortable and difficult. But I think these are the things that those people need to hear. And it's also, if you feel like you need to say it just to be true to yourself, then I think you have to listen to those instincts in your life.
Well, it seems like we have to wrap up, which I mean, the time just flew. Obviously, have a lot more questions to ask of you, but it's just it's a joy to be among people who are really just kind of doing the work they care about, and it sort of emanates from their core. It's such a relief. It's a balm to really see this happening with all of these amazing folks, just on the screen, but all the people you're connected to. So thank you for the work you're doing. And we should really thank the Non-Obvious Diversity Summit for giving us a chance to chat with each other, and SRC partners for also doing all of this work. And I hope we'll keep talking. I hope all of these amazing people watching you will also support the work you're doing. And I really look forward to the next time we can meet in person. So until then, thank you all. Stay really healthy. And can't wait to see what you do next. Thanks.